This is just the introduction, and a series of videos will follow on will AI and robots exterminate us, updates on technical progress and breakthroughs, and how, whether, as technology has done in the past, AI and robot-driven increases in productivity will result in more jobs becoming viable. But this video prefixes those points with a look at the long-term goal, where are we heading, and concludes that we are headed for a revolution, with who benefits from that revolution not yet clear. Understanding the possibilities depends on what happens in another topic covered here, population. AI and robot advocates propose the potential for a future of abundance, glossing over that this can only mean man-made abundance, with the ability to enjoy nature or live in a home by the beachside or other desired location determined by their availability on this finite planet divided by the total population. See the population topic for more. Reality is, not only is abundance limited to man-made things, which can be greater in abundance than ever before, but not infinite abundance, which means, just as with natural wealth, the big question becomes how, with what abundance there is, be distributed. In our current predominantly capitalist system, theory is the creation of wealth requires both capital, or assets, and labour, and provides economic returns for both. But another way to look at it is to consider the ability of a person to perform labour, or work, over their lifetime, also as an asset. Banks will even lend money against the value of this asset, and, as when buying a house, potentially large amounts of money. And banks don't lend without asset backing. Increase the reputation of the person or qualifications, and that asset of their ability to work can rise in value. When considering it from this point of view, society relies upon sufficient value being allocated to the potential of a person to work in order for that person to be able to have a satisfactory life. The analogy is that everyone is allocated the basic asset of the ability to work, and that asset has to be of sufficient value or society basically just won't function. Some people define a class system, which, although everyone can work, could be seen as having a working class who must work for a living or depend on that work asset alone. A middle class who also must work for a living but either have assets or earn enough to be able to build assets that would enable supplementing their income with returns from capital investments. A wealthy or upper class who may work but in theory could exist on the basis of their other assets alone. In the videos on The Economy is Like an Egg Farm, linked below, I argue that the average person stopped benefiting from population growth at some point in the 20th century, with which point being dependent on which country. But under this current system, the economy, governments and owners of any asset in finite supply all still benefit from population growth, which is why many in those groups are panicking about population growth ending. Ever wondered why you hear the government promise more jobs, only to then hear the finance reports say that employment is in the target range, and if unemployment drops lower, interest rates will rise? When governments say more jobs, they really rub their hands and think more consumers and more taxpayers. But AI and robots can change that equation. The future of abundance promises that while previous technology lifted productivity of each person in farming, manufacturing and production and reduced workers required, AI and robots promise the ability to entirely automate huge amounts of work. Yes, it will enable some new jobs, but the trend is new jobs tend to be less and less connected with what's needed to maintain society and more about optional enhancements to life. While the ability to work and contribute, whether paid or not, will always be desirable, I'd argue at some point the output of work stops being necessary for society. AI champions have argued that at this point, the solution is a UBI, or Universal Basic Income. And while I do support a UBI scheme as an optional way to run a welfare scheme, I see this suggestion as assuming a large percentage of the population is not only going to be placed on welfare, but faces no prospect of going beyond being on welfare. And that isn't even the biggest problem, which becomes who pays. This future effectively ends the ability to rely on the asset of labour. Yes, we already have welfare for those who do not have that asset, but those on welfare do come at an economic cost that the economy must be able to meet. If we have a UBI, or even, as Elon Musk has suggested, a not-so-basic universal income, who pays it? And more importantly, why do they pay it? Do they still see more people as a benefit or as a liability? Currently, governments always want more people paying tax and spending their earnings, but under this scenario, all but the upper wealthy class would simply be an expense to whoever's paying the UBI. Is this the end of the working and middle class as we know it? Ideally, we'd all become like a new upper wealthy class, living in our own manor house with robots as servants. But for governments or others paying the bills, they could see it as less expensive to just eliminate people. Those current plans of governments to try and fight any coming natural population decline may in hindsight have been seen to be a mistake. What determines whether most people can become like a new upper class or just cast aside depends on either effectively developing a new economic system or, under the current system, allocating everyone an asset. Whether it can work under the current system and people will still be seen as adding value will depend on what that asset is and how it's created. The UBI type plan is effectively to allocate shares in some fund that pays each person a return. But no one is answering where the fund pool comes from or looking at other solutions to what asset people should have. Further videos here will follow on looking at the answers to those questions. And if we don't solve it, what else do we do? Just banish all but the current upper wealthy class to Mars? Anyway, interesting to have comments from others.